forward to this particular part of the program where Pat Oedy-Murray gets to chat with a very illustrious guest. Pat, it's going to be a great chat with Pat, huh?
Yeah, it really is, because this is somebody that I'm not familiar with, and I love this topic because need some help with it. So today we have with us Andrea, and I hope I'm saying this right, Picciotti-Bayer. Andrea, am I saying that right?
You did a great try.
Okay.
I love it.
God bless you. Give us your name, and then I'll tell them who you are.
So actually, it's Picciotti-Bayer.
Picciotti.
You weren't that far off. Yeah.
Okay, I was trying to do it but anyway, she's a legal analyst for EWTN News and the director of the Conscience Project. Andrea, I read your article in National Catholic Register on this case before the Supreme Court on the Oklahoma Catholic Charter School. And I must admit, I have two questions right off the bat. Take them in whatever order you want. One is I was wondering why Justice Barrett recused herself, and the second one is I'm trying to figure out the advantage. I kind of see disadvantages with trying to make a Catholic school a charter school, but maybe I'm not understanding this right. So take it away, Andrea, and I'll jump in.
So those are two really great questions, and I think all Catholics should be asking that. With regard to Justice Barrett, first off, the justices of the Supreme Court really do have kind of a lot of flexibility to decide when they should recuse themselves from a given case. Obviously, if they have relatives that are litigating a case or they have personal financial interests in a case, they should recuse. And in this one, it's a pretty easy understanding that the St. Isidore's Virtual School, which is the charter school in Oklahoma that's at the center of the case, was represented for a very long time and before the court by Notre Dame's Religious Liberty Clinic. And as everyone will remember, Justice Barrett was a longtime law professor at Notre Dame and is actually very, very close friends with one of the law professors that leads the clinic. And so Nicole Garnett, who's just a great advocate for school choice and religious freedom. So this is one of those. It's sad that she isn't involved in the decisions of the regarding this case, but it makes entire sense, and it really does show, in the face of a lot of people talking about ethical issues at the Supreme Court, that the justices are very, very attentive to their ethical obligations.
Yep, makes all kinds of sense now. Yeah, please.
Yeah, no. Now, to your second question, that's a big deal, right? Charter schools are government-funded schools, but there's enough of a distance between them to allow them to operate independently. So they have kind of almost like a license to operate instead of the same kind of control that the government has over our public schools, to operate independently, provided that they meet a certain standard related to curricular decisions and that sort of thing. So, within the school choice movement, within the religious freedom movement, some people legitimately say religious schools need to stay out of it. And we see that, for example, in higher education, with some schools not taking federal funding in order to operate independent of the demands of the federal government. On the other hand, there's a very, very strong argument in my mind that why not offer to families religious options if school choice is part of the state program. And within the school choice, we can see charter schools are among school choice options. Others, of course, are vouchers or scholarship programs. But why not allow parents as great a choice as possible to be able to find the best fit for their child?
So, Andrea, is at the heart of this, it isn't necessarily about making religious schools fall under the charter school banner, but is it just allowing them to be part of school of choice?
Absolutely. It is that latter. It's allowing our religious schools, if a state has a charter school program, allowing our religious schools to opt in to be able to be certified. And once they're certified, it really does open up the number of children that will be able to benefit from the schools. Because a lot of times, even though our parochial schools run just incredibly efficient for what they charge families. There are still families that just aren't able to access it, even with the kinds of tuition assistance that the diocese will offer. So this is allowing religious schools to opt in, again, if a state has a charter school program. It doesn't require states to start them. It doesn't require states to create charter schools at all. But once they do, they need to do so in a matter of fairness, a principle of fairness. And that is consistent with the two religion clauses of the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Again, these two clauses enshrining religious liberty here in our Constitution here in America are not warring clauses, but instead they work collaboratively to allow for religious pluralism and religious freedom.
Well, Andrea, could Oklahoma just open up the idea of school of choice to religious schools without making them opt into kind of a charter school banner? Couldn't they just say, well, yeah, okay, you can be a part of this, schools of choice, or no?
It really is, how do you define school choice? As I mentioned before, you could have vouchers, you can have scholarship programs, and we've seen that in two cases that the Supreme Court has dealt with just in the last recent years, where the state of Montana had a scholarship program and they were excluding religious schools. And the Supreme Court said, no. If you're going to have a scholarship program, you need to open it up for students to be able to use that scholarship at religious schools. The same thing happened just a few years ago in Maine, where there was a voucher program for rural kids who didn't have a public high school to be able to use a voucher to attend qualifying schools, private schools. The state of Maine said, except if you're a religious school, and the Supreme Court smacked it down again and said, no. Once you have a voucher program, you can't discriminate. So if Oklahoma wanted to have school choice that looked like maybe education savings accounts or vouchers or scholarships, they could do that, provided they didn't discriminate on who could, where parents could use those resources.
Right. So their system doesn't allow for vouchers, and it's a totally different system.
Honestly, and this is where I'm going to confess ignorance, I'm not sure if Oklahoma also has voucher programs or scholarship programs. But what we know is that they did open up a robust charter school program, and the state officials actually felt it should be open to everyone. It's only the current attorney general that said, no, we have to exclude religious schools because we're concerned about an Establishment Clause issue in our state constitution. And I think the Supreme Court really is going to say, provided you have this program open, you can't exclude based on the religious identity or the religious purpose of the school.
Do you feel that the state is going to get more involved in what those religious schools do then in Oklahoma, if they allow that?
Charter schools have really been incredibly vibrant across the country and in different states. Usually there's a minimum threshold, but the whole point is to allow for greater creativity and competition. And so, obviously, if the state starts getting into more of the internal workings, a lot of our religious schools are going to have to decide, do they want that? But then there's also a question about autonomy. And we have a First Amendment protection for the autonomy of how we run our schools.
Thank you so much, Andrea. This is enlightening. I'm coming at it from an Ohio stance in my head, so it's a great explanation. So our guest today was Andrea, I think it was Picciotti-Bayer. She is a legal analyst. Oh, good! A legal analyst for EWTN News and director of the Conscience Program. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thanks for having me on. Have a great morning.
You too.
Thanks for that chat, Pat. And I think it's interesting because, to your point, if they decide against this in Oklahoma, that might have an impact on what we're doing in the state of Ohio, school choice, which is a fabulous program because we are the beneficiaries, we being Catholic schools, of this fabulous law pushed forward by Governor DeWine and approved by our legislature. So we don't want anything to change with that, that's for sure.
No, and I don't think it would, just because we approach it differently. We don't put them under the public or the charter schools. They remain Catholic schools.
Well, that's good to know.
The Supreme Court's already decided that.